Kieran assures me we'll all be sick of that music by the end of the afternoon, so we'll get used to it. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be back here again for Sounding Out 2024. I really enjoyed last year's event. I'm sure there's lots of you here who were there as well. And some of the issues and themes that were raised at last year's event have played in my mind, actually, in the year since, particularly the intimacy of radio, and how it's sort of like it can be for people who listen to the same radio show every day, like having a friend or a family member in your home. So that was one of the big themes from last year, and Kieran has talked through some of the really interesting presentations and discussions that we're going to be having today, including, and I'm not going to go through them all, but whether attention really matters in building brands. That's a very interesting one, I think, given all of our attention spans at the moment are getting shorter and shorter. I mean, my Apple Watch sort of dings and, the whole room fades away until I see what happens to on my Apple Watch. And we're going to be talking about how to create audio that creates passion, and also the power of humor in advertising. And I have to say I can really speak to that last one when it comes to the power of humor, because this is something I come across pretty much every day, but there was one really egregious example for me on Drive Time last month on the radio show that I present, because I just finished up the programme, and to be honest I was delighted with how it went, because we had a government minister and really strong, in-depth probing interview with the government minister, and we'd had a really heart-rending, very difficult interview actually with the family from Gaza who were talking about their challenges in surviving and what's going on there. And one of our reporters had managed to get his hands on an unpublished report about failings in the health service, so we had that as well. Like, all in all, really strong current affairs programme, delighted with myself. And I was talking to my mother in the car afterwards. I love talking to my mother after programmes because she's always gassing me up, telling me how great I am. And I don't know if you know any presenters, but we are inherently a very insecure bunch. So we need to be told how great we are as often as possible. It rarely comes our way, but we love it. And my mother assures me she's an independent arbitrator on this. She's not biased at all, so I can take her word for it. So there I was in the car driving, and she was on the car phone, and she was saying, great programme. And I was waiting for, great interrogation skills, or your empathy in that interview was really great. And instead she said, what I really liked was that one about hugging pigs. Like, that was hilarious, about how hugging pigs is good for your mental health. And I shouldn't have been surprised, because actually this is what happens on a really regular basis. We present 2.5 hours every day. Of that 2.5 hours, about 15 minutes max is what we would call the lighter items. And of those 15 minutes, it's those items that people come and talk to me about, always. It's not the government minister interviews, it's not the really difficult interviews. Rarely it's those interviews, it's the ones about hugging pigs and how it's good for your mental health. So there you go. What I do is important. I have to keep telling myself that, So I can't wait actually to hear what Bridget Anger has to say about all this a little later on. She's going to be talking to us about humour in advertising. Now, having said that, the year that was, it really showed me how radio, in my view, audio generally, but radio in particular, is the unsung hero of media communications in this world. And because it was another really big news year. I mean, they all seem to be big news years, but this really seemed like a big one, particularly, again, with that conflict unfolding in the Middle East, and we see that every day now, and it's getting more and more concerning. But also, we had 2 attempted assassinations of one of the presidential candidates in the US, and we had everything that was going on with the Democrat presidential campaign. Lots going on here at home as well, with the Dublin riots and local elections and European elections, and there'll be lots more happening with elections in the next couple of weeks, despite what Simon Harris says, I'm sure. So it was a really big news year. And at one point in the middle of it all, I think it was a couple of hours after the first attempted assassination on Donald Trump, I saw this post on Twitter saying, this guy, if only there was a podcast I could listen to live that had all the latest updates on what's going on. And I read it a couple... Yeah, radio, folks, it's radio. But the guy, I think, in that particular instance, had unknowingly put his finger on the real power, the superpower, as I see it, of radio, which is, I think it does, like no other media does, and I include social media and online media in this as well. I think it has the ability to bring news to you, verified news and first-hand account news of what is happening immediately, like in my view. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do think that no other radio does, or no other medium does, excuse me. Because I do remember starting working on we'll an unnamed late-night television current affairs show, where a couple of hours before we were due to go on air, I'd only just started working on the TV show, and I think it was about 2 hours before we were due to go on air, a story starts breaking. It's not a huge story, but it's a big enough story. And I suggested, we should cover that. That's a big enough breaking story. And I remember everyone just looking at me, sort of aghast. And then the objections started coming. We can't get a camera there in time, or we can't get the guest to studio in time, or makeup isn't ready, they won't be able to deal with that amount of guests on time. And all of the objections obviously were really, really valid, but it just really brought home to me, I think, at that point in time, how radio can just react so quickly. All you need is the guest to have a phone, and for that phone line to hold up for the duration of the interview, and you can bring first-hand breaking news to people pretty much immediately. So for me, that's why I think radio is always going to be my first love.